The king has returned. In this case, the king of the ring. We are going to go through the entire bracket, predict every match, and tell you who's going to win the whole damn thing in Saudi Arabia. Stay tuned for possible spoilers, but these are predictions. There are 3 matches which have already taken place. Gunther has defeated Sheamus in round 3 of their feud. Gunther won all of them. Ilya Dragunov defeated Ricochet in the match of the night during Monday Night Raw. And Jey Uso defeated emergency replacement Finn Balor. It would have been Drew McIntyre, but the moment wasn't to come. Finn Balor now actually seems more likely to face someone like Damian Priest for the implosion of Judgment Day. But hey, there's always Dominic Mysterio. The remaining match for the first round on Monday Night Raw is Kofi Kingston versus Rey Mysterio, and it really comes down to who will be more defeatable by Gunther. I have Kofi Kingston picking up the win. There's still plenty going on with Rey Mysterio, Carlito likely to get involved, whereas Kofi Kingston has a clean slate and very few enemies. He's Kofi Kingston, everybody loves the guy. Unfortunately, this does mean he will line up against Gunther, but let's get back to that once we have the SmackDown roster out of the way. AJ Styles versus Randy Orton is our first round 1 pick, and this one is not necessarily an obvious one until you consider that AJ Styles just lost on the biggest stage, that being France, and he is needed in this bracket because there are not that many heels. Carmelo Hayes is going to be in a great spot with the next match, or Baron Corbin is going to be in the great spot. Either way, I see AJ Styles defeating Randy Orton because bloodline. Baron Corbin versus Carmelo Hayes is up next. Carmelo Hayes is new to the roster but did lose to Cody Rhodes already. Losing to the top guy in the company isn't really the worst thing in the world. Baron Corbin has been here, he's done that, he's got the t-shirt, he's worn the t-shirt, he hasn't worn the t-shirt, he's got the hair and he's not got the hair. I see him losing on his return to SmackDown. LA Knight takes on Santos Escobar, and Santos Escobar has largely been lost in the shuffle in the last few months. We've seen plenty of him working with Rey Mysterio, with Judgment Day, and while I do feel Judgment Day could get involved, it is simply too late in the day now that the actual draft is completed. LA Knight picks up the win. He does need it. He did win at WrestleMania but then lose subsequently to AJ Styles. So a win for LA Knight here should start the reheating process to get him back on the map. Our final first round match on the SmackDown side is Bobby Lashley versus Tama Tonga. And as much as I am a massive Bobby Lashley mark, Tama Tonga has just arrived. He is a house of fire, and I'm honestly very excited to see where they go with him. Personally, I'd be taking Tama Tonga quite far with this, though we could always see the involvement of Kevin Owens, of Randy Orton, but there's so many members of the bloodline now to provide protection. I have Tama Tonga beating Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley's been getting disrespect backstage, particularly from some of the newer names like Carmelo Hayes recently. I do feel a loss here would make him reevaluate and potentially relaunch him into a position where he could be taking on Cody Rhodes at some point soon. Tama Tonga is simply the right guy to push. We're at the quarterfinals now, and we'll start with the Raw side. Gunther versus Kofi Kingston. Let's be blunt here, guys. Kofi Kingston does not stand the slightest of chances. Those chops are going to reverberate around the entire arena, and Kofi Kingston, or Rey Mysterio, to be honest, is there purely to be fed to Gunther, to be demolished and to be destroyed. I think we all know where it's going, but we're still quite excited to get it there. For me, Gunther is going to run rampant over Kofi Kingston, and while Kofi has had his moments, and he will be celebrated as former WWE champion in this moment, it gives Gunther a scalp worth carrying. He's not going to be fully reheated from losing the Intercontinental Championship, but it's a good start, especially when you consider who might be waiting in the semi-finals. We get to the other Raw quarterfinal now, where Ilya Dragunov, having already defeated Ricochet, goes up against Jey Uso. I was hyped for Ilya Dragunov versus Drew McIntyre, but I just think Drew McIntyre cannot afford not only the loss, but the incredibly snug style that Dragunov works. Ilya Dragunov versus Jey Uso is going to catch fire in this arena. Jey Uso is one of the most popular men on the entire roster, and while Dragunov is still very new to the Raw audience, he's earning plenty of fans and plenty of fandom. Ilya Dragunov is one of those that has to be seen to be believed. He gets over purely on the intensity in the ring. Jey Uso is his perfect opponent. Now, Jey Uso did just lose a match to Damian Priest, and you would expect him to be reheated, but I cannot imagine a world in which we are this close to Gunther versus Ilya Dragunov on the main roster, a match so worthwhile that it's at New Day and the Usos territory, despite the fact it's never happened on the main roster and they don't pull that trigger. I don't know how Jey Uso loses, but he does. Ilya Dragunov advances to the semi-finals on the Raw side. Moving back to the SmackDown side, we have our quarterfinals there. The first is AJ Styles versus Carmelo Hayes. You think Carmelo Hayes and Cody Rhodes had a good match, apart from one tiny botch? You wait and see what AJ Styles can do with Carmelo Hayes. At this point, I'm essentially pushing Carmelo Hayes as a face. Yes, he worked with Cody, but there was respect afterwards. And with AJ Styles, you know you're up against a top-level heel who can carry you to an incredibly high-quality match. That momentum will take us far. AJ Styles versus Carmelo Hayes. Again, we're in the exact same situation as we were with Jey Uso. AJ Styles has just lost a match to Cody Rhodes, but Carmelo Hayes has also just lost a match to Cody Rhodes. I have the new up-and-comer winning, and honestly, this is going to be a tournament of new up-and-comers because Carmelo Hayes defeats AJ Styles. We go now to the second SmackDown quarterfinal, and it is LA Knight versus Tama Tonga. Very classic face versus heel, a very standard bloodline match, to be fair. Once again, I see the bloodline getting involved in a way that just prevents LA Knight from having any chance whatsoever. We are building a group right now to take down the bloodline, and I do see a world in which Randy Orton, Kevin Owens, and LA Knight take on Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga, and Tonga Loa in the days to come. Unfortunately, today is not that day. LA Knight picks up the loss to Tama Tonga, giving him a reason to start a blood feud with a bloodline, but Tama Tonga advances to a semi-final against Carmelo Hayes. You remember what I said about this being very fresh faces. The only real established face in that roster, who I have in the semi-finals of King of the Ring, is Gunther. And you have to consider he ain't that experienced a face when it comes to the main roster. This is a Triple H era in action. He's putting his own people in, and it's going to work. Because when you consider the semi-finals, you know it's going to be fun. Let's get to those. The Raw side semi-final is Gunther versus Ilya Dragunov. We know this is quality. We know it's worth every second. We also know that Ilya Dragunov is Gunther's kryptonite. Gunther is almost unstoppable. He can call the Sami Zayn win a complete fluke. He can get away with that, but he still can't beat Ilya Dragunov, and this just further establishes that. Gunther can recover from this. We know big moments are coming, a Money in the Bank win, a Royal Rumble win, something that gets him into the eyes of Cody Rhodes. But right now, Ilya Dragunov beats him 1, 2, 3 and gives him a mountain to climb. Ilya Dragunov goes into the King of the Ring final in Saudi Arabia. This leaves us with a SmackDown semi-final, Carmelo Hayes versus Tama Tonga. There were so many different routes we could have taken. We could have seen Randy Orton versus Bobby Lashley. We could have seen Styles versus Knight. But no, Carmelo Hayes gets the push and Tama Tonga gets protected. This is very classic face versus heel. Tama Tonga already established as a bad guy because of everything going on with the bloodline. I don't see that changing here. Carmelo Hayes has looked great, but the bloodline will not be denied. This is a huge opportunity, but it is one, unfortunately, which the more experienced hand of Tama Tonga will pick up the win for. Carmelo Hayes has all the charisma required to be the top act in the company, and honestly, I think he's going to get there eventually. Today is not that day. Today is Tama Tonga's day, especially when you consider what this sets up. Ilya Dragunov, newly brought up, quite possibly respected by Imperium at this point, versus the Bloodline's Tama Tonga. But when we go to Saudi Arabia, where I expect there may well be that Randy Orton, Kevin Owens, LA Knight, any element thereof that gets them into a tag match against a Solo Sikoa, a Tonga Loa, something like that, even just a LA Knight versus Tonga Loa match, Tama Tonga will not be as protected as he has been. Ilya Dragunov, meanwhile, faces a very real prospect. Will there be a semi-final from each side in Saudi Arabia, or just the final? If it's just the final, Ilya Dragunov is fresh, he is hungry, and he is a killer. When it comes to the final of the King of the Ring, I have Tama Tonga losing to Ilya Dragunov. King Dragunov going forwards to win the King of the Ring, establish a recent call-up on the absolute greatest stage that he could possibly imagine, and put him in a situation where he literally cannot lose to Gunter. He might be winding up the bloodline, particularly after beating Jey Uso right at the beginning as well, but they're on the wrong show and they cannot stop him. Let me know in the comments who you have winning King of the Ring. In the meantime, check out more PLE Wednesdays as we get more information coming through about King and Queen of the Ring in Saudi Arabia.